Hello friends, this is Professor Rajagopalan and I am here today to give you one more video. In fact, it is the last in the current series. The video to go with my book, Environment and Ecology, Disaster Management. Fourth edition is now in the market, published by Oakbridge Publishing. This is the cover of the book. You may have seen it before with this snow leopard. Now in that book, I have given a strategy for you for studying environment and ecology, both for prelims and mains. And there I mentioned or given a list of high priority chapters for the prelims actually. And in that you will find biodiversity basics and conservation appears. It's an important topic for the prelims. So let us look at how to study this topic of biodiversity, both the basics and the conservation. And these form chapters 3 and 4 in my book. So how important is the topic? Well, it's a favorite topic in the prelims exam. Not so much for the mains actually, but certainly in prelims so many questions are asked. The questions are on India's species, protected areas, these have in common. There is a static or theory part in biodiversity, and that is not much and it's also easy. There is also a dynamic part on the status of species and the efforts to conserve biodiversity in various ways. But again, it's not difficult to learn, though somewhat difficult to remember. You must know the answers to many basic questions such as meaning and value of biological diversity, factors that determine the degree of diversity in an ecosystem, how is biodiversity distributed in the world, what is the state of global biodiversity, what are the causes and impacts of the severe loss of biodiversity. We are now seeing a very severe loss of biodiversity and you must know why that is happening. What is the IUCN red list of actually threatened species? What is the level of biodiversity in India and where does India stand in that same IUCN red list? What is biodiversity conservation? What is meant by in situ conservation and ex situ conservation? The protected areas approach, is that being implemented globally in India and how? What are the national, international agreements and initiatives on biodiversity conservation? And most important, what is the UN Convention on Biological Diversity? It has also some protocols added to that later. What were the Aichi biodiversity targets and were they achieved? What is the conservation status of critical Indian species like the tiger, elephant, rhinos, turtles and vultures? And how is indigenous knowledge being used to conserve biodiversity? There are many concepts in this topic you must understand. Things like biodiversity hotspot, what is meant by global 200 ecoregions, mass extinction, colony collapse of bees, doctrine of ultimate responsibility, critically endangered species, endangered species, threatened species, vulnerable species, endemic species, keystone species, and sentinel species. So various kinds of species are at different level. Some are really endangered and critically endangered. Some are not so, but they are vulnerable and so on. These things you must know. You should also know something about biosphere reserves, community reserves, conservation reserves. These are all done to protect biodiversity. What is meant by an eco-sensitive zone. And of course we talked about ex situ and in situ. National parks. protected areas, sacred groves, which are somewhat unique for India, seed banks, and wildlife sanctuaries. Well, there are a number of international organizations, agreements, and reports, beginning with the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. There's the UN FAO State of the World's Plant Genetic Resources. There's the World Conservation Monitoring Center, Critical System Partnership Fund. There is this NGO Conservation International. There is the idea of Global 200 ecoregions, International Whaling Commission, and of course IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, with its red list. And the UN also publishes a Global Biodiversity Outlook periodically. And WWF, the NGO, global NGO, publishes Living Planet Report. Then there is this Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. There's something called the 30 by 30 goal, 30% by 2030. Find out what it is about. There's a Protected Planet Report which comes out almost every year. There's the South Asia Wildlife Enforcement Network. We are a part of that. What does it do? The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, one of the largest, it is the largest global seed vault, where biodiversity is now preserved for the future. Then the NGO BirdLife International does a lot of work for bird conservation. Global Biodiversity Outlook, already mentioned. Then there's a Global Tiger Initiative and a Tiger Recovery Program. Find out what these things mean and how India is involved in them. Then there is this UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Program and the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Coming to India, we have our Biological Diversity Act. There is a Biodiversity Authority. There is a strategy and plan. And we also have specific species level plans like Indian Rhino Vision, Project Tiger, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, Project Elephant. We are doing a lot for vulture conservation. Vultures were almost wiped out in this part of the world, India, Pakistan, and so on, and that is being revived. There is Wildlife Institute of India, the Bombay Natural History Society, very well-known NGO, and there are individual groups such as the Beach Bachao Andolan. Well, that is about biodiversity. I just want to end with this announcement. We are publishing a new book, rapid revision book of question and answer for mains. In that I have included solved POEQs of the last 10 years and more than 200 practice questions for mains. Sometime later we will also publish a similar Q&A book for prelims. That is all for today. This is likely the last video in this series. We will come back later. Wish you all the best.